Last year, many had high hopes for peace on the Korean Peninsula. But on Tuesday, the DPRK fired missiles just as the U.S. and South Korea launched its annual joint military exercises. 1 year later, has any serious progress been made toward denuclearizing the peninsula? And speaking of missiles, Washington suggests that it may soon deploy intermediate-range missiles to Asia. But would they be aiming at Chinese targets? Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Li Qiuyuan, sitting in for Liu Xin. On the Korean Peninsula, the script looks familiar. In the north, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is accused of further developing its nuclear weapons program and test firing another round of missiles. Then South Korea and its American ally launched their annual joint military exercises, which they did this week. In response, the DPRK accuses its southern neighbor and Washington of threatening an invasion. So they flexed their muscles as they did on Tuesday when they reportedly fired 2 short-range missiles into the sea. What, if anything, has changed in the Korean denuclearization efforts since the historic heralded Singapore summit in June 2018, besides that President Trump no longer insults the DPRK leader as Little Rocket Man but calls him a friend? And are we just as far from a nuclear deal today? Well, joining me are in Beijing, Mr. Xiyu, a senior fellow at the China Institute of International Studies, and from Florida, Ivan Eland, a senior fellow at the Independent Institute. Welcome to you both. So once again, we're seeing tensions reaching a dangerous level there, and I find it fascinating. I mean, this comes just a little over a month after that historic meeting between Trump and Kim at the Korean border. And back then, that raised a lot of hopes that the denuclearization talk would soon resume. But now it turns out that little to practically nothing has progressed, really. Let me get your take first, Ivan. Why does South Korea hold these joint military exercises with the U.S. in the first place? They know that Pyongyang sees it as a provocation. They know that they see it as eventual preparation for an eventual invasion. Why do they keep doing that?
Well, in the view of the U.S. government, it's to keep the forces ready to fight in case there's a war, in case a repeat of the 1950 North Korean invasion of South Korea. So that's why they do it, and they're willing to take North Korea's blustering, and this is more than blustering, it's missile shots, to say their displeasure, to show their displeasure with the whole matter. But they consider it a defensive exercise. However, the real question, I think, for the United States is, should we leave Korea and turn over the defense to South Korea? South Korea has 40 times the GDP of the North. We're not in a 1950 situation anymore. So I think as long as we're there, these exercises probably have to be done. But the question is, should the U.S. Turn the defenses over to South Korea, which is more than capable of defending itself from its North Korean neighbor?
Mr. Yang, your response to this?
Well, I think the insistence of the joint military drill between U.S. DPRK stem from 2 considerations. One consideration is a technical one. Technically speaking, it's necessary for both of the forces to exercise for enhancing the coordination and the cooperation in case of any kind of war. But more importantly, the second consideration is a political one. Say, both U.S. and ROK are conducting two-hand tactics policy towards DPRK. On one hand, both Seoul and Washington seek for reopen talks with Pyongyang for denuclearization. But on the other hand, they plan to build up a pressure framework on DPRK so that the talks with DPRK can be pressed and the DPRK can be forced to accept what Seoul and Washington are wanting. So basically, soft hand and hard hand. On one hand, Trump really want to reopen the talks. On the other hand, they want to insist on the maximum pressure, including the sanction regime and the military drills and with others.
And does that work?
Well, I don't think it's work. In fact, during the last 2 decades, U.S. has kept doing such tactics on both hands, say negotiations and pressures, even military threats. Of course, for DPRK side, they also keep playing the two hands game. On one hand, sometimes return to the table for negotiation, but sometimes return to the testing field to give terrible and provocative tests. So basically, two hands versus two hands, that is the game we are watching now.
Now, this two-hand strategy, Ivan, I want to get your take on this. Another point I want to clarify is that following the 2018 Singapore summit, President Trump actually indicated that he would suspend these joint military exercises, which some analysts back then criticized as an undeserved gift to the DPRK's chairman, Kim. But now they have decided to resume the annual exercises. I mean, what kind of message did it send to Pyongyang?
Well, I think the North Korean leader has said that Trump assured him this wouldn't happen. Now, whether that's true or not, we don't know what actually happened at the informal meeting at the DMZ on June 30th. But that could have happened or could have not happened. We don't know. The countries doing exercises to get leverage in negotiations and negotiating at the same time is not unheard of, and it's fairly common. And even countries will even fight and negotiate at the same time. So it's nothing new. People try to get leverage in negotiations all the time, in particular adversarial countries who are conducting peace negotiations or whatever, and that's what's happening here. It's disarmament and peace that we're talking about here. But nonetheless, there's still tensions, and these things are going to happen. I think we need to look at the larger issue. So is North Korea ever going to give up its nuclear weapons? Probably not. And is the U.S. ever going to give up the South Korean alliance? Probably not. I would like to see that happen. I think the U.S., as I said, should be less involved there. But those are the facts. So I'm not sure where this goes, really. It's good, I think, that Trump is trying to negotiate with Kim, but I just don't see North Korea giving up its nuclear weapons because also North Korea, from its perspective, is frightened by these exercises, even though they're only computer simulated exercise in this case.
And Mr. Yang, your response to what's been said there, the DPRK is not likely to give up its nuclear arsenal. I mean, the country has just fired 2 missiles on Tuesday. What's your read?
Well, I believe, in my observation, majority of observers, both Asian and Americans, don't believe DPRK will really want to or plan to give up their nuclear deterrence. However, I have a different observation. Say, nuclearization, of course, that is really good for North Korea. However, the nuclearization really cost a lot of opportunities for North Korea's modernization, North Korea's all-dimensional modernizations driven by the economic modernization. So actually, the nuclear and missile programs is a matter of opportunity costs. So they cannot get both, say, both nuclearization and modernization. And finally, they have to make a choice between the two. But the problem facing Pyongyang is now, where is the opportunity? If they really give up the nuclear weapon and related missile delivery means. So that is the key question. So actually, it's an interactional game between North Korea and the international community. Say, if we really want to persuade North Korea to give up nuclear weapon, first thing first is we need to let them believe, even without the nuclear deterrence, they will remain in safe. But now, nobody can guarantee, say, without a nuclear deterrence for Pyongyang, Pyongyang will remain in safe. So, in other words, we need to make a deal. Say, North Korea must give up the nuclear and ballistic missile deliveries. But on the other hand, North Korea's concerns at security and the diplomatic and economic issues must be addressed simultaneously. So only when we based on the fair deal, then we can force North Korea to give up nuclear weapon so that they can get an opportunity and reduce the, remove the cost.
Now, Ivan, let me get your take on the likelihood of whether a deal on this can be reached. I mean, last month, the Wall Street Journal reported that despite optimism uttered by President Trump, the DPRK has continued to develop its nuclear facilities, and that is based on some satellite images. And more recently, the DPRK reportedly test-fired several missiles, to which Trump responded via Twitter, saying that there may be a United Nations violation, but Chairman Kim does not want to disappoint me, I'm quoting his words, with a violation of trust, and there is far too much for Pyongyang to gain. The potential as a country under Kim Jong-un's leadership is unlimited. He will do the right thing because he's far too smart not to, and he does not want to disappoint his friend, President Trump. I mean, despite Trump's downplay of these ongoing activities, is there any cause for optimism that a deal can be reached, or is the denuclearization unlikely for the foreseeable future?
Well, let me be clear. I think Trump's attempt to negotiate with North Korea is better than what initially happened when the two countries were throwing around threats, including the threat of nuclear war. That's in nobody's interest. It's not in China's interest. It's not in the U.S. interest. It's not in North Korea's interest. It's not in South Korea's interest. But I say, and Trump has offered this idea that you can modernize your economy if you just give up your nuclear program and missile program, a long-range missile program, and this is a trade-off. And you know, that may be appealing to a certain degree, but North Korea is its main goal is not economic development. That may be a goal, but it's not. Its main goal is to survive, and it believes that nuclear weapons will not only allow it to survive, because it doesn't trust the West, that is South Korea and Japan and the U.S., and also it gives it, the nuclear program is so ingrained in the prestige of the regime, and that's very important because the regime doesn't have much else going for it. Its economy is over-controlled, and so it needs to rely on nuclear weapons and security as its bedrock. And I think that's stopping it from doing the economics, better economy for giving up its nuclear weapons trade that Trump would like to do. And I think that's the rub. So, I applaud Trump for trying, but I'm not sure it's going to happen. And then what happens after the negotiations fall through?
Right, and then other officials in his administration, like Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, who was in Asia for the ASEAN Summit, and National Security Advisor John Bolton, take a much tougher line with Pyongyang, kind of sending a mixed signal there. But Mr. Yang, final question over to you. China has long been criticized by the United States for not doing enough to contain the situation here. I mean, what's China's position on this?
Well, first of all, I would say it this way: China never link the U.S.-China relation, the state of U.S.-China relation, with the matter of cooperation with the U.S. on the denuclearization of the peninsula. So during the past 2 decades, U.S.-China relation up and downs, but the cooperation on denuclearization between China and the U.S. Has been stable. So now the bad shape of U.S.-China relation in general won't be linked with China's efforts for the denuclearization. And then number 2, I think no matter how difficult and the sharp differences between the DPRK and the USA, as long as we insist on the dialogues, then we can keep the things moving on. And simply saying, I'm confident and optimistic about the resumption of the DPRK USA working level negotiations in foreseeable future in a couple of months. But in middle and the long run, the mutual distrust will impede, even obstacle, any substantive negotiation from achieving results. So basically, we need to resume the talks first, and then try to make a compromises at every fundamental substantive issues. Then we can move our course step by step towards the ultimate goal.
Right, to rebuild and restore trust. Thank you very much, Mr. Xiyu of China Institute of International Studies, and Ivan Eland from the Independent Institute.